Hi, my name is Evie Hatch and I'm here at Bankside Gallery in London today to talk to Kylie Sandford about her pastel drawing Microcosm 1, which is a beautifully intimate, delicate portrait of lichens and mosses. Hi Kylie, thank you so much for coming here today to talk about your work and your practice, and congratulations for winning the Dry Media Award at Jackson's Painting Prize this year. Could you start by telling us about your artistic journey?
At a young age, I took art classes after school at the Art Gallery of Ontario, and that's in Toronto, where I partly grew up. And later I went to university at Concordia, which is in Montreal, and I did a Bachelor's of Fine Arts there. Then years went by, and I managed finally to get back to creating art and creating art full-time. What happened was I had a child and we moved out to the country, and as soon as I was in that environment, I felt there was space and time to relax and really create, and that's when the landscape started really working its way into my art.
When did you start using soft pastels and why?
I guess I've been collecting soft pastels over the years, and I suddenly realized I had quite a large collection of them. And they're so beautiful. When you open a box of those pastels, it's like being in a candy shop. Like, the colors are just beautiful. So I paint with oils mostly, and I felt that I was starting to fall into a pattern, and it's not a good feeling because I want to be always excited and I want to be surprised by what comes out when I'm creating, and I want it to be personal too. I opened up my boxes, I bought some really nice paper, and I started to draw, I guess, about a year and a half ago. And I've been working with those pastels in between my oil paintings, back and forth, looking for experimentation and learning new things. I find that when I'm working with the pastels, I might learn or discover a color combination or a color juxtaposition that's really pleasing, and then I can use that next to my oil painting. I guess it's realism. It looks like realism, my oil paintings, and I wanted something a little bit freer, a little bit more painterly. I wanted to loosen up my style. So I thought, if I work with these, chunky pastel, I won't be able to get down to the detail, but I still do go in that direction. It just naturally happens anyway.
One medium informs the other, so it's interesting how those two are in a dialogue in your work and your broader practice as a whole. That's really interesting.
I learn more about the pigments as well. So actually each pigment has their own properties, and you really feel it with the dry pastel. It's so, like, some of the darker colors are really like chalky and they won't stay on, and some of them are really luscious and like thick, and they just lay themselves on the paper. And you can feel it then later on with the oils as well. What's transparent, what's opaque, and why. And so I'm always interested in traditional materials and getting down to the properties of, each individual material. So all of it interests me anyway. And I like to renew my practice as much as possible and then end up with something surprising.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? That it's a medium that kind of has the highest pigment to binder ratio. Mm-hmm. There's the most pigment, right. The closest that you can get to painting with pure pigment, aren't they?
Yes.
So that makes a lot of sense, actually,
yeah.
that you like using them.
And it is immediate. So I thought, okay, I want to get my idea faster onto the paper. It can even be a drawing that will lead to an oil painting later on as well. But I don't know if it's as immediate as I expected. I tend to like to explore a long time on each piece. And I started using new tools to see what can be done with the soft pastels.
You talk about getting kind of up close and personal with your materials, but your subject matter requires you also to get close up and personal with the natural world. Can you talk about why you're so drawn to the natural world as a subject?
Where I live, it's very easy to be quickly completely immersed in nature, and I find I need it. It's as soon as I'm out in nature, I feel good. If I'm overwhelmed by what's going on in my life and I go out in the woods, I feel fine right away. And I think any human needs this. And our contact with nature can be easily cut off, and we can get distracted from it. So I use that in my work as a reminder of what's really important. And I put it right up there in your face so that you can't ignore it. The world of lichens and mosses was showing up in my landscape paintings a lot. And then I realized they were in there so often. And I started to read on lichens and mosses and getting really interested in the way they function. And that led to the series, which included Microcosm 1. They're all close views of lichens. And I just hope to bring people's attention to those little worlds that are all around us, on the bark of trees, on rocks, and also maybe hopefully spark curiosity about what's going on there in the lichens. They're right under your feet, you can just walk right by them, but actually if you just stop and take a look, take a breath, there's a whole world that to be discovered right there that's really fascinating. There are multi-beings that work together, that live together, and that's the only way that they survive. And I think that's a good example to live by as well.
That's a really interesting way of looking at landscape, because so often in art history you get the enormous landscape, the mountains, the huge sky, but there's also there's many different kinds of landscapes within that landscape, isn't there?
Yes.
And I suppose what you're capturing is the landscape that we don't always see, that's a lot smaller than we are actually.
Yeah. I don't want it to be ignored. So that's why I bring it right up close, so that you have to look at it. You have to look at it closely. And then you can get lost in the little details of what's there in front of you. But it's right down there on the ground, or it's on the bark of a tree. Things that we just walk by and we don't take the time to appreciate and get curious about.
I suppose soft pastel is it kind of invokes that kind of texture, doesn't it, of lichens and mosses, and the kind of that really kind of tactile, you can almost feel them with your eyes.
They're very soft. You always feel like you want to touch the mosses. And same thing with the pastels. They're so velvety, matte. So I find it's the perfect medium for creating with lichens and mosses. And I used a little bit of Conte on the rock to get a few little harder lines and harder edges. And I use also a tool which has a rubber tip to like just smooth around the edges of the lichens and the mosses. Or I use a cold pressed paper, which is very textured, so that it can grab as much pigment as possible. Because with the pastels, you can only layer so much and then it's saturated.
Did you wet the pastel at all when you were making?
At the very beginning of the drawing, on the darker areas where I wanted to start from a darker ground, I painted with water. And just that I chose watercolor paper for that reason. And then I built on top of that with the lighter colors. It's a different process than with oils. You have to plan, anyway, the way I work, you have to plan a little bit what's going to happen. Every drawing is a new experiment to see, like, okay, how can I what's going to be the process to get what I want at the end?
Which artists have inspired your work the most, do you think?
Emily Carr and the group of 7, who are Canadian landscape painters, definitely an influence. Drew Burnham, who's a West Coast painter in Canada, has beautiful landscapes, so they really speak to me. And also, lately, Nicholas Pardee, who's a pastel artist who had a large exhibit at the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts recently, and it hugely inspired my work. Very beautiful colors, and because of the pastels, it was really appealing to me.
What advice do you have for artists who are looking to start working in soft pastel?
Just experiment. You don't have to do what the process that people tell you have to use with pastel. Try different papers, try different tools, and just have fun with the pigments. Don't give up when it gets too difficult, because they are messy, and there's a point of no return sometimes, and they just learn from that and just move on to the next piece.
I think that's a really interesting point about the versatility of soft pastels and also the limitations of them. Limitations maybe is the wrong word. I don't know what word you'd use, but there's certain parameters that you work within with soft pastels that kind of is what makes them an interesting medium to work with.
Yes, I think part of the process of an artist is trying to master each medium. And the pastel it still remains a bit of a mystery to me. I'm still experimenting with the pastel. And because I've never been told what to do with them, it's really freeing, because I can just play. And often when you just play, that's when the good things happen. And you can blend, you can get softened edges, you can use tools, But it's true, you can build up to a certain point and then it will not take any more pigment. So there is a point where you just can't go any further in the direction that you might like. I suppose you could remove it. You could remove it with something, with some kind of kneaded eraser. But I think you could just take the lesson and just move on to the next piece when that happens.
I think it's something that really fascinates me is whether pastel artists consider their pastel pieces to be paintings or not, to be paintings or drawings. Do you consider this piece to be a painting or a drawing?
I consider it to be a drawing. The only painting that I did was just add a bit of water to lay some ground on the white paper. And then I moved on to all drawing after that, just mark making and juxtapositions of colors and dots and lines. Yeah, lots of abstraction, actually.
You've shown all over the world. You've shown particularly in Canada. How does it feel to exhibit here in Bankside in London?
Oh, I'm so happy to be showing here. It gave me the opportunity to travel here and meet so many wonderful artists and the organizers who've done such a fantastic job. It's been really exciting.